Well, I'm going out in Texas, black woman. To hear that while I'm on.
The only difference from 1920 and now is they can't take us out and hang us on a tree. They can just send us to prison for life. It's the same thing. We ain't gonna never be free again. We all gonna die.
In the last 2 decades, the war on drugs has become a principal excuse for locking up tons and tons of black and brown people. They call that racial profiling, and they do that everywhere, everywhere. So why is it you got so many black folks getting locked up? Because we're the only ones they're looking for.
In the spring of 1998, Sheriff Larry Stewart decided to investigate the drug scene in Tulia, a small town in the Texas Panhandle. Using funds from a regional drug task force, the sheriff hired an undercover agent named Tom Coleman to conduct a covert sting operation. Early on the morning of July 23, 1999, the arrests finally came. Even Sheriff Stewart was unprepared for his agent's success. In 18 months, Coleman had allegedly made more than 100 controlled buys of powdered cocaine. As the images of suspects appeared on the evening news, it was clear that those caught in the sting had something in common. 39 of the 46 arrested came from Tulia's tiny black community, which numbers less than 350. More than 10% of the town's black population had been taken down on the word of one man.
They arrested us at 7 in the morning. Honest to goodness, by 12:01, they came with eviction notices. I mean, there was 13 women in a cell together, and we all received these eviction notices at the same time. If that's not conspiracy for something, then what is? We hadn't even been completely booked in. We hadn't even got our bond, sentencing or anything before we got eviction notices. And we were thinking, the ladies that were locked up, they had children. What were they going to do? How were they going to get their stuff moved out of the house and everything? I mean, it was just one hard day that day. I mean, everything was taken away in one swoop, thanks to Tom Coleman.
Yes, those people are in prison based solely on the word of Tom Coleman's. It was their word against Tom Coleman's word. And actually some of those defendants had witnesses to say that they was elsewhere, and still yet they was convicted, based solely on Tom Coleman's word.
Since the arrests, Agent Coleman's credibility has come under fire. Coleman was dismissed from his previous law enforcement position for embezzlement. While working undercover in Tulia, Coleman did not wear a wire during any of the alleged transactions. No video surveillance tapes were made, and no second officer was used to corroborate his reports. Instead, Coleman recorded names, dates, and other details of the transactions by writing them on his leg.
Well, it looks like there's only one person using powdered cocaine in that city, and that was Tom Coleman, because he was the only one supposedly buying. People were not buying drugs from the black community there.
While surprise search warrants were served at dawn on the alleged dealers, not one of the raids turned up drugs, weapons, or significant amounts of cash.
If there were that many drug dealers here, I just wondered why I couldn't ever borrow any money from anybody. I mean, no one had any money, nobody had bank accounts, nobody owned a home, nobody owned a car. Cars were repossessed, and I mean, nobody owned anything, you know? And for them to say that was many drug dealers here, and for Tom Coleman to spend as much money as he had here, you know, you'd think they'd have found some of that money, you know, or found some of the merchandise that was bought with that money. There's nothing, you know, there's nothing.
It's like having 6 Santa Clauses in a city of 20 people. You know, you don't need 46 drug dealers. There's no way they could all survive off the drug trade in a city that small.
Images of the early morning bust appeared on local television news. In the days following the arrests, the names and addresses of the defendants were published in the Tulia Herald, branding them as dealers before they were tried. Gary Gardner, a farmer who lives in nearby Vigo Park, became an advocate for the defendants because he thought the media coverage of the bust would bias potential jurors and keep the accused from receiving a fair trial.
I initially got into it because of a lot of the statements Larry Stewart, the undercover agent, and McKeechin made that I thought were prejudicial. Plus, the way that they drug these people in front of the cameras. I guarantee you, if you drug my wife in front of the camera at daylight without letting her comb her hair, she's going to come across not a pretty person, although she's one of the prettiest women I know. And they had facilities up there to protect the dignity of these people. They have a garage up there at the jail they could have drove these cars in and unloaded these prisoners and booked them without doing that embarrassing number. So they had to have done that deliberately. And the only reason I could think of to do it was to influence the people in town that these people were guilty. I don't consider anyone I'm convicted yet. I don't care if they have had 11, 10, 15 trials, because they haven't had a fair trial in front of an impartial group of their peers, and until they do, in my books, they're not convicted. They're just being held illegally.
More than half of the defendants pled not guilty and went to trial. Many were sent to prison, their sentences ranging from 20 to more than 300 years.
But I told them, I said, if you didn't do it, you stand firm, and you know, whatever they say, there's something to come out of this. And we didn't know that this was gonna happen, you know. We were just saying, oh, you're gonna be okay. Your retrial, you'll get out of this.
Well, Freddie come to me and told me they offered him a plea bargain. They wanted him to plead for 5 years. So he asked me, what did I think about it? And I told him that, I said, you didn't do it, did you? He told me no. I said, well, if you didn't do the crime, then you stand to be right. If it costs you 100 years, then you take the 100 years. You stand to be right. And that's why Freddie didn't take a plea bargain. That's why he went to trial.
Joe Moore, the first defendant tried, was described by District Attorney Terry McKeechin as one of Tulia's major drug dealers. At 67 years old, Joe Moore, a hog farmer, was the oldest defendant. He was sentenced to 99 years for 2 counts of cocaine delivery.
This house here is where Joe Moore lived. He's the man Mr. McKeechin called the kingpin of the Tulia drug dealers.
He was made out to be the horriblest, baddest person, you know, in the world. The kingpin, the top man, or whatever.
He never owned any expensive vehicles, any expensive toys, or any expensive house. If he ever made any money dealing dope, he still got it, because he damn sure didn't spend it.
In Joe Moore's case, it was used as an example to the rest of the blacks. You plead or you go down for life.
That's mainly why I took the plea bargain. I was scared. I wanted to see my family. I had seen how much time they gave other people. I figured they'll do the same to me, which they would. I ain't no different from them. We all black.
The conviction of so many black citizens, most of them under the age of 30, has brought racial tensions in this small town to a head. Many believe that the sting selectively targeted young people who had ties across racial lines. Those whites who were arrested in the bust all had romantic relationships with blacks.
That sends a message: don't mess with black people. And if you're black, don't mess with whites. And why is that? I read a paper the other day. It said that we sit together, we drink together, we go to funerals together, we go to church together. Do you see that since you've been here?
It really haven't changed, because they was doing this when I was a little girl. I remember when we had to go through the back door to get hamburgers or whatever, you know. I remember all that stuff. So I guess it's trying to get back like that. I don't know what it is.
When I moved here, I moved my kids away from the violence of Fort Worth, and I exposed them to racism, poverty, and somewhat some people that are bigots. And which is the lesser of the evils?
Prejudice or violence.
That's pretty bad. Now, when we lived in Fort Worth, I never had my kids coming home, Daddy, they called me a nigger at school. Never had that. And the teacher and the principal say, oh, you never had this happen to you before?
It's no future for them here, the young black people. You're wonderful as long as you're winning our football games, our basketball games. You know, I'll buy you track shoes, I'll help you get clothes, I'll help you do anything. I'll help you go to the game if your mother can't afford it. And don't even think about moving out of this town if, you know, because we want that sports. We come together on sports. Now that's about the only thing that I've seen that can bring two you together.
Like most of the boys that they got were athletes, and now in high school.
And
yeah.
they junior high, and now they're arresting them.
Yeah.
But as long as they was on the football team winning their games, they wouldn't care. On their track team running their race, run boy run, they wouldn't have cared. But now when they graduated, oh, we ain't gonna worry about them no more. We can't help them no more.
Just every 2 or 3 years, every time a young individual graduates that happens to be black, if that individual is a star athlete, they will, for some reason, that individual ends up in prison here. They graduate from high school, they get their PhD in the prison house diploma. That's where they go from there. If they stay here, they go to prison. If they leave, maybe they can do something different.
Got our kids away from here. As soon as they graduate, they were out here. It was just that simple.
We don't even want them coming home.
Don't even come home.
Because the sting sent so many young parents to prison, friends and family have taken on the responsibility of raising the children they left behind.
The main reason I played out is because if I wouldn't have, I know I was probably going to get at least 25 max. I mean, nothing less. And the second reason I played out is because my friend Michelle Williams, she had gone like a week prior to that and got sentenced, you know, and her kids were here, and I had someone to take care of my kids if I were to go, but who was going to take care of hers? And I just didn't want to leave them, you know, hanging out there to dry. So that's one of the reasons I took the plea, is for the kids.
And the kids, they just cry and cry. You know, they wake up at night, they want their mama, and they cry and cry and cry. Or in the morning time, they wake up and they want their mama and their dad, and they cry and cry and cry. And sometimes I'm here by myself, and then I think about them, and then I'm crying. So, you know, it's pretty rough. And it's not only me. I think a lot of the families, they just, when they by themselves, they probably just cry, and they just wonder, you know, why this happened like this.
Black families in Tulia have begun to organize in response to the arrests and have traveled across Texas to bring national media attention to the story, raising questions about the way the state's drug task forces conduct investigations. The indictment against Billy Wafer was dismissed because his lawyer was able to present witnesses and time cards that confirmed that Mr. Wafer was at work the time the deal was alleged to have happened. Mr. Wafer's lawyers have filed a suit against Tom Coleman and Sheriff Stewart, alleging that they conspired to eliminate blacks from Tulia by manufacturing evidence in the drug sting.
I'm happy to an extent. I'm not elite about it because our goal was to get those that was in prison out and yet I proved my innocence. They're still sitting in prison. So I'm not going to really be completely fulfilled until we complete the mission. The mission is to get those that's in prison out, and for them to prove they're innocent too. And once we do that, I'll be very happy.
Charles Kiker, a retired pastor, lives in Tulia. Kiker, along with other Tulia residents, both black and white, have come together to form a group called Friends of Justice, which is working to overturn the convictions.
We're still hoping. Maybe it's hoping against hope, but we're still hoping that the injustice of the injustice not just of the trials, but of the entire sting can be brought to light, and that somewhere down the road, all of the trials will be thrown out. Even if that means that some people who were possibly guilty of dealing drugs are released as well, because the sting in itself was so poorly done, so illegally done, that the whole thing just should be thrown out.
A little town like Tulia, why do we have federal money for undercover? We have an undercover in here all the time, trying to, basically the way I see it is seduce young people. Mm-hmm. That's their job, is seduction. Anyway, I'm afraid for my children, and I'm afraid for everyone's children because of this mindset of catching people, of catching them and punishing them. It's frightening, and it's wrong.
I think this is how the drug war has been fought across the country. Since I've been doing some studying on, task forces and how they work, I see that it's a number thing to the biggest part of them, and to get their grants from the government, they have to show progress. And it just seems to be all across the country that blacks are the more that they can, more easy to make the cases on than in the other race. So, I believe that's just the way they're going to fight the drug wars until we do something about it.
What's happening here in Tulia is a microcosm of what can happen nationally. And you all are at the epicenter of an epidemic of law enforcement inequity and excesses that are national in scope. And that what you do here as a community in terms of organizing, fighting for your rights, and being vocal and reclaiming those family members who've been taken away from you will be a model for black and brown communities throughout the U.S. Everything that you need to prevail in this struggle is right here in this room, and it's right here in this town. And all it takes is for you all to be committed, to be clear about what your commitment is, to remain in action, and to stay motivated by love. And I believe that ultimately you will win, because love always wins.
I'm gonna stand until I can't stand no more, if I have to stand by myself. And I don't feel like I'll have to stand by myself, because there's too many other people, that's involved in this.
Texas black woman.